AI doesn't need permission to replace tasks. It does not wait for HR alignment, board approval, or a restructuring memo. Replacement starts at the task layer, not the role layer, and it begins immediately. The dominant mechanism is task arbitrage under measurement pressure. When a task becomes measurable, it becomes optimizable. When it becomes optimizable, it becomes compressible. When it becomes compressible, capital reallocates. This is the gravity of the modern enterprise. It is an unyielding law of organizational physics. This is not a tech morality story, it is a budget story. In U.S. enterprises, compensation is tied to recurring output categories. Every single task has a highly specific cost signature: cycle time, error variance, training burden, supervision load, and rework probability. Once that signature is instrumented, finance can compare it against digital substitutes. AI does not need to replace you. It only needs to underprice your task cluster while staying inside acceptable error tolerance consistently. The incentive vector changed when firms moved from supervising human effort to instrumenting digital throughput. Managers used to observe work through physical presence. Now systems log it automatically. Ticket systems record closure velocity and accuracy. CRMs show response timing. Version control shows iteration density. Once work is logged, it can be benchmarked. A task that can be benchmarked becomes a procurement question. That is why replacement doesn't announce itself. Reporting, research, and meeting cycles shrink. Each shrink feels like productivity. Collectively, it reduces role density. Teams do not necessarily fire people right away. They simply stop needing as many. Headcount reduction happens through hiring freezes, backfills that never open, and scope compression that looks like focus. The org chart stays stable while the work inside each box becomes thinner. Who benefits? Shareholders benefit from margin stability. Leadership benefits from predictable output. High adaptability operators benefit because orchestration becomes a scarce capability. Mid-layer professionals whose value is concentrated in structured execution, summarization, consolidation, documentation, and routine coordination absorb the cost. The cost bearer is the compensation stack closest to repeatable output. This is where most professionals misread the situation. They believe using AI increases leverage because they deliver faster. But faster delivery inside a standardized workflow reduces differentiation. Standardization turns how you do it into a template that anyone can use. Templates reduce bargaining power. Compensation narrows. Bonuses compress first. Promotion timelines extend. Hiring bans tighten. The firm still pays for judgment, but it pays less for production that can be replicated, audited, and rerun. The enterprise budget layer explains the speed. Headcount is a heavy operating expense with long-term commitments. Automation is software spend that can be scaled, paused, or reallocated. Under wage inflation and margin pressure, CFOs prefer costs that behave like subscriptions, not salaries. So capital shifts quietly. Fewer incremental hires, more tooling, and more centralized workflow design. The system becomes the worker, and humans become supervisors of exceptions. Second-order effects show up before layoffs. The definition of senior shifts. Seniority used to mean output volume plus experience. Now it means boundary setting, knowing what not to automate, where risk sits, and how to design controls. This is why seniority is being redefined in real time. Performance management shifts toward exception resolution and reliability ownership. People who own controls and outcomes maintain pricing power. People who own drafts and first passes lose it. Falsifiability matters. This mechanism reverses under specific conditions. If model reliability stalls, if regulatory compliance requires human verification that negates savings, or if legal exposure from automated errors exceeds labor cost reduction. These constraints slow adoption in high-liability domains, but they rarely stop substitution. They move it into assisted workflows where humans validate outputs rather than generate them. The real change is workflow compression. Autocomplete replaces blank pages. Templates replace drafts. Summaries replace hours of manual synthesis work. Routing rules replace coordination. Nothing dramatic happens, but dependency shifts. When your team can complete the same output with fewer human steps, the firm has less reason to pay a premium for those steps. If the output is the same, the human premium disappears entirely. Exposure is fundamentally uneven across the modern labor market. Professionals in the $100,000 to $150,000 range often sit in clarity-producing roles. They translate data into decisions for others. Clarity is becoming model native. Authority remains scarce. If your compensation is tied to repeatable pattern recognition, structured language production, compliance drafting, campaign variant generation, report consolidation, or forecasting narratives, you are near the compression layer. If your compensation is tied to capital allocation, negotiation, stakeholder leverage, and risk-bearing trade-offs, you are buffered longer. This is why permission is the wrong mental model. Enterprises do not ask permission to reduce unit cost. They test, instrument, and scale what works. Once a workflow shows perfectly measurable cycle time reduction at acceptable quality, it becomes policy by default. By the time leadership uses the words transformation, the task stack has already moved. Repositioning upward is the only way to survive the shift. The only logical strategic response is not panic. It is strategic repositioning. Audit your task stack with one question. Which parts are evaluated primarily on speed, format, and repeatability rather than consequence? Those parts are clearly measurable. Measurable becomes optimizable. Optimizable becomes compressible. Reposition upward. Own the problem definition, the trade-off, the risk decision, the control design, and the outcome accountability. Use AI to accelerate the commodity layer, but do not let your identity remain inside it. AI does not need permission to replace tasks. It needs measurable work, acceptable error tolerance, and a cost curve advantage. Once those exist, replacement accumulates before it becomes visible. If you measure your safety by performance reviews alone, you are observing the wrong signal. Measure instead how much of your job is non-transferable judgment under uncertainty, because that is where compensation stabilizes as tasks compress.